Brain injuries and billion-dollar lawsuits. We'll ask if concussion could be the knockout blow for some of the world's favourite sports. I'm Martin Stanford. This is Inside. Welcome to Inside. From billion-dollar lawsuits in American football to record fines in Australian rugby league, one word is uniting sports around the planet: concussion. Medical evidence about brain injuries caused by playing within the normal rules of a number of sports is growing. It's raising serious questions for sporting authorities, professional players, and the tens of millions of children who just want to play their favourite game. Insight senior correspondent Dana Lewis reports.
They talk about rugby as a contact sport. It's actually a collision sport.
And here's another high one to look for Astle, going in!
Football has been about protecting the product of football, and what it should be doing is protecting the players.
Coaches, general managers, presidents, and owners of these hockey teams could be held personally liable, and that was something which was a game changer.
On a Saturday afternoon at London's Richmond Athletic Grounds, the only thing at stake in this rugby match seems to be pride. Both sides are serious about winning. And in 80 minutes, we witnessed several players in those scrums and tackles get injured. Many of the players on the Q Occasionals versus Richmond teams are former semi-pro players who take this game so seriously, many of them get hurt playing it. I'm sore watching you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of collisions. It's really physical.
Yeah. It's a bit high impact game, particularly a quick, fast game like that against big boys. Yeah, there's a lot of collisions in that.
And what about collisions of the head?
Well,
we saw a couple today.
They talk about rugby as a contact sport. It's actually a collision sport. It's way more than just contact, and you're right, the big hits going in, and when the ground is hard, people banging their heads off the ground, that's also an issue.
Have you ever had a concussion?
I have. It was pretty strange. You don't really know where you are, and I got asked what my birthday was and how old I was, and I was like, I don't really know.
This Richmond player is hit on the back of the head in one collision. Dizzy, disoriented, he is led off the field by a physiotherapist who says he will not be allowed to return to the game.
Okay, well, the guy today wasn't unconscious. He just hit the back of his head. I mean, we see that quite often.
Collisions and brain injury in rugby have been tragic and lethal. In 2011 in Northern Ireland, 14-year-old Ben Robinson dies after being allowed to return to his rugby game after a heavy collision. 2015, Devon, England, 23-year-old Lily Partridge with a history of rugby concussions dies after a head injury in a match. Players rarely pull themselves out of competition. Sports sociologist who has carried out studies on brain injury, Dominic Malcolm.
There's a huge amount of evidence which suggests that participants in rugby and football frequently hide the symptoms of concussion, they frequently ignore medical advice, and they frequently play on even though they're aware that there may be long-term risk to their health.
Recently in rugby, they've been emphasizing bigger players, bulking up, harder hits. But the fact is, in the last 5 years at professional level, the number of reported concussions have basically doubled. And that's got all sorts of leagues considering major rule changes to minimize injury. Upper body tackles could one day be banned. And the scrum where players literally bang heads are also controversial. Fact, in 90% of concussion cases, Malcolm says there is no loss of consciousness.
Current thinking is that loss of consciousnness probably only happens in about 10% of all concussive incidents. So we need to look much more frequently at the broader range of symptoms.
Symptoms of what is now officially called CTE, as depicted in the hit movie Concussion. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy was discovered by Dr. Benedum Malu while working in the Pittsburgh coroner's office. His examination of American football players, which began with the death of former Steelers player Mike Webster, found hits to the head in football later led to dementia depression, and even suicide. We spoke to Dr. Amalu from Los Angeles.
Is this cumulative injury? Is there a tipping point where somebody gets CTE, or can it be from one blow?
Just one episode of exposure to blunt force trauma of the head can cause a permanent brain damage and result in the traumatic encephalopathy syndrome. In reference to sports, it is more likely to be repetitive, seemingly innocuous, repetitive blows to the head that will generate a cumulative outcome over time.
For years, the National Football League denied blows to the head during game time led to long-term brain injury. But when 4,500 players, including Hall of Famer Tony Dorsett, sued the league,
you can see my front lobes.
The case was settled for over $760 million in compensation.
They use you up. It's all about winning games, football games, regardless, and they don't care because they figure, we got replacement factories, which are colleges. And so they just put you out there and, feed you to the wolves.
Lawsuits seem to be the only thing to get the attention of professional leagues.
We were really focusing on the culture of violence and the fact that lots of people in the NHL, in positions of authority and power, were in fact trafficking in violence.
Toronto lawyer Tim Danson went after the National Hockey League in Canada. In 2004, his client, hockey player Steve Moore, was punched, dragged to the ice, and suffered 3 broken vertebrae and a concussion. A decade later, the case was eventually settled out of court. Head injuries in hockey have also been linked to long-term symptoms of CTE. Danson says Moore's case has already changed the game.
I don't like the use of the word concussion. It's a traumatic brain injury, and I think if people understood it as a brain injury as opposed to using the word concussion, they might have a better appreciation of its severity. There's been, quite frankly, a significant change in the game of hockey, at least in North America, in that fighting is down significantly, stage fighting is all but eliminated, and the goons that we used to call them, who went out there and fought, really almost, not completely, but a relic of the past.
His brain was so badly damaged. I think when Dr. Willie Stewart actually re-examined Dad's brain, he actually said to us, if he hadn't have known he was looking at the brain of a man at 59, he'd have thought he was looking at the brain of a man of at least 89 or in his 90s. And that's really shocking.
Dawn Astle has set up a foundation pushing soccer to properly investigate CTE. Her father was a legendary English footballer. After a long career, Jeff Astle, who was known for heading the ball, died in 2002. And a coroner ruled he had degenerative brain disease, or CTE, linked to repeated traumas of heading the football.
Hope's free kick is headed home by Astle.
Your dad played in the old days when there were big leather footballs that weighed a lot more than what they play with today. Yes. And that's a way of the football league right now kind of writing that off, saying, well, footballs are different now and those were different days. Do you believe that?
No, not at all.
Why?
Not at all. Well, the experts who I speak to, they say basically because it's the physics, it's the actual physics of a ball striking the head, which makes the brain ricochet backwards and forwards, like it would with what Dad died with boxer's brain. It doesn't matter whether it's a heavy boxing glove or a light boxing glove. It's the physics of the brain being moved around inside the skull. But also, there's no evidence. There's no evidence to say that the modern day ball is any safer.
Well, all the evidence is still being analyzed and debated when it comes to professional soccer. The experts don't hesitate to say that children under the age of 14 shouldn't be heading the ball at all. That's because their neck muscles aren't strong enough, and they say they're also not coordinated enough, which means they may not head the ball in the right part of the skull.
Roll, step, take away.
Paul Bruce was a professional footballer for England's Queen's Park Rangers. As a defender, heading a football was and is mandatory.
Let it run across your body. Good.
It was part of the game. If the ball was there to be won, we'd have to do it. If we didn't do it, then we'd be off the pitch. It was as simple as that.
But today, Bruce teaches kids, including 12-year-old Alex.
Good God.
He runs sports programs for 20 schools in London.
Go straight, good.
And Bruce won't instruct kids on how to head the ball.
As they get older, I'm sure I would introduce these things, but not up until the age of 12, because it might affect them. They could get some bruising to the head.
Ultimately, it's down to the players and coaches policing themselves, which firstly requires a degree of knowledge about concussion, but also requires a desire to implement those concussion protocols and to be as conservative and cautious as we possibly can.
The science of identifying concussions in sports is quickly developing. A number of sports experimenting with the X patch, which is worn by players and records the G-force of collisions and head trauma. Another firm offers a new helmet for American football, and the video of how much trauma the head sustains in collisions is, if nothing else, alarming. It notes concussions are up 58% in 1 year in the NFL.
Hartford. Oh, it's off the bar. Yes!
Players and their families are now more aware than ever of CTE. Dawn says her father didn't remember his glory days.
I don't think football actually wants to accept that football could be a killer, and it can. Everything football gave him, football took away, because he died never even knowing he was a footballer.
Most rugby players don't wear headgear. They seem to crave the big collision and never want to admit they're hurting. And this coming from Rory, who is not only a player but a physiotherapist too.
If I see a guy go down and he's looking a little bit dazed, then I'm really worried about him. I think, you know, as Bartes was saying, there's a bit of a feeling when you go down, you don't want to come off. Like, you're enjoying yourself, and you know, we live for that. We live for that impact. So, you know, it's difficult to pull yourself off.
But the game has started to change.
It's clear now people aren't doing head-high tackles, and anybody who's stupid enough to do so quickly gets sent off. So that message has got through. So basically any tackle from here down should be okay.
In reality, more than pride is at stake in so-called collision sports. Along with victory and loss, their health hangs in the balance. I'm Dana Lewis reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined now by the sports journalist Chris Scudder, and also joining us is John Hardy. He's the Professor of Neuroscience at University College in London. John, where are we with the medical wisdom now? Is it the case that if I play NFL for a reasonable length of time, I will damage my brain?
Well, I don't want to talk about NFL because we've not looked at NFL. But of course, I mean, I thought your report was very rounded. There is clearly an issue with what you've just been calling collision sports. There's clearly an issue, and clearly some players who have played, many players who have played football in the States and hockey, and now we know some players who played soccer here in the UK have had evidence of CTE. There's no doubt there is an issue.
But it doesn't automatically affect everyone. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say. I think what we know there is a problem. I think that where the science is that we know there is a problem. We just don't know how big a problem it is yet. So we reported on the brains of 12 ex-soccer players a month ago, and 5 of them, they'd all died with dementia. 5 of them had evidence of CTE. So there is an issue.
Stay with us. We'll continue this conversation with Chris and with John in just a moment. This is Insight. We'll ask in a moment if concussions could change some sports forever.